knock on wood.
All of us have a different perspective on this Yom HaShoah day. All of us have different experiences. We have with us Ruth Lindemann, who's a Holocaust survivor, who will be speaking. We have with us Rabbi Jules King, who will be not only speaking, but will recite Kaddish at the end. We have Cantor Joe Gold, who will sing El Rachamim at the end as well, before the Kaddish. We have Jeff Brandt, whose father, with Earl Greif, and Randy Greif is on with us as well. Both of their fathers 25 years ago were influential in building the memorial we have in Palm Desert, the only one of its kind in this area. We should all be very proud of that they were able to do this with the help of Palm Desert, with the help of the Federation, and with other Jews and non-Jews who participated and donated to this. 75 years ago, approximately, it's not yet May, the war in Europe ended, which meant that the liberation of all the other concentration camps began, not only Auschwitz, which was liberated in January. My father, whose picture I'm showing here, this is before the war. He was born in 1903. His name is Elidor Geiger. He was 41 years old when he was in Mauthausen, and he survived barely. He was weighing 40 kilos, 88 pounds, with phlegm typhus. And he walked home to Hungary after he got a little bit better in a hospital there, and found out that his parents were gassed in Auschwitz. Found out his two sisters were gassed in Auschwitz, not to speak of another 50 close relatives who were gassed in Auschwitz. So this whole thing that we're remembering today is like a horrible nightmare. It's a nightmare because my father screamed. I grew up in Hungary in the beginning, and then when we emigrated to America, he would, nighttime, he'd scream, remembering not only what happened to him, but what happened to his parents. I mean, imagine that your parents are gassed, and your sisters are gassed, and you'll never to see them again. We do these memorials for ourselves, actually, because we cannot really emotionally ever cope with this. We can never understand how an intelligent society like Germany could turn into such Nazi murderous regime. It's impossible to understand. Perhaps what we're going through right now with this COVID virus and this lockdown, and people are getting frustrated, they're getting antsy, they're protesting, they want to open up, they don't want to be in protection. Maybe this will give us an idea how people can behave. People do not always behave in the most decent way. Luckily, there is enough decent people around to save us, and that you can build up a society again. But we always have to be vigilant. Evil is always knocking on the door behind us. I like to say an old saying, it looks like I'm paranoid, but it doesn't mean that nobody's following me. Anyway, I'd like to give the floor to Holocaust historian Michael Barenbaum first in Los Angeles. Michael, the floor is yours.
I want to, we're commemorating now the 75th anniversary of the end of the Holocaust. But we should remember not only its end, but its beginning. And its beginning did not begin with large deeds, it began with small deeds.
I remember that part.
You remember it
I
well.
was there. So
It
I can
began
tell you
with
about that.
prejudice and discrimination. It began with the collapse of democracy, the loss of freedoms, the erosion of civil rights and civil liberties, and turning society under economic pressure, one against the other. I'm struck by the fact that we have an increase of hatred in our society. Up until now, it was occurring in a time of enormous prosperity. And I begin to fear what's going to happen now in a time of economic scarcity. And I'm reminded in the United States that Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Adolf Hitler came to power at precisely the same time. Hitler on January 30th, 1933, and Roosevelt on March 4th, 1933. In those days, we inaugurated the president in March and not in January. The difference between them is that Roosevelt turned the society one toward another, and Hitler turned the society one against another. And I think we have to learn from that, because we're going to go back into a world that is radically different than the world that we left when we began to sequester ourselves in the type of quarantine and staying at home and not going out into society. 22 million Americans have lost their jobs. The world is now entering into a recession. We run the risk of a Great Depression. And the question becomes whether our society can pull itself together or pull itself apart. Let me say one other philosophical thing about the origin of Yom HaShoah and the tension with Yom HaShoah and its relationship to Passover. There was a debate in Israel as to when you remember the Holocaust and on whose calendar. Do you remember the Holocaust on a Jewish calendar? Do you remember it on a secular calendar? Because the persecution of the Jews is not something we did, it's something that happened to us. And then what date do you choose? Do you choose January 30th because Hitler came to power in 1933? Do you choose November 8th or November 9th or 11th because of Kristallnacht, the night of the pogroms? Do you choose January 20th because of the Wannsee Conference? Do you choose September 1 because of the outbreak of World War II? Do you choose, as the world bodies have chosen, January 27th, the liberation of Auschwitz? The Jews in Israel want to argue that it should occur on April 19th because that is the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. April 9th, today is actually the birthday of Adolf Hitler, and they wanted to present April 20th, and April 19th was essentially the desire of Himmler to present Hitler with a 56th birthday present, a Judenrein Warsaw, the greatest Jewish city in Europe, free of all of its Jews. That also was the first night of Passover. And it was the night when Jews went to sit at their seders to commemorate the liberation from Egypt. The juxtaposition was fierce, the contradiction intense. So the question became in Israel, when do you remember the Holocaust? You can't remember the Holocaust during Passover because the contradiction between liberation and enslavement is overwhelming. The Orthodox didn't want it in the month of Nisan. The secularists wanted it as close to Passover, as close to April 19th as possible. And a decision was reached that it would be the 27th of Nisan, which is the one day after Passover that can never occur on a Shabbat. Proximity to Passover, and then also the distance it had, the closeness it had to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. What is the contradiction between Passover and Yom HaShoah? Passover celebrates liberation, the journey of Jews from enslavement to freedom, the walk into the desert, the sojourn, and the journey to the promised land. The Holocaust was the opposite. It was the movement from freedom, however much surrounded by persecution, into enslavement. And if the Jews in the Exodus saw Sinai, the Jews in the Holocaust had the revelation of the anti-God and the anti-man, the idolatry of worshiping the Führer, and the inhumanity that said that instead of the revelation of God being responsibility toward a fellow human being, the worship of Hitler meant destroying fellow human beings, men, women, and children. But the connection has one very deep meaning. Jews respond to suffering not by remembering suffering, but by transforming suffering into a lesson, to deepen moral conscience, to enlarge human dignity, to enhance human decency, and to plead for compassion. That's how we remembered the Exodus from Egypt, and that's how we remember the real implications of the Holocaust, which are we can't have a world in which people turn against each other, divide each other by race, by color, by creed, by religion, divide the human community by hatred, but rather we have to find a way to say that we are responsible for one another, that we have to accept the variety and the diversity of human beings, and we have to turn toward each other and with each other. And that's a lesson deeply urgent in our time, made more urgent by the crisis through which we are living at this moment. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Ruth Lindemann, please tell us about your horrible experiences.
Well, there's a similarity between what happened to me and my family and now. The Ides of March seem to be a bad omen. From one day to the next, March 1938, our world ended totally. And I am familiar, or there's echoes of memory, where suddenly in Austria and Vienna, Jews could no longer go out to any public places. No restaurants, no theaters, no concerts, no movies, no hospitals, no public transportation, no soccer games, which really made my father very unhappy because he liked to go to soccer games. In other words, we had to be isolated totally and marginalized. And every Jewish person lost their job. So there was mass unemployment of Jews. It sounds very familiar to me, what's happening. However, we are isolated now in pretty nice places. I see some of you have rows of books and live in nice homes. And we were moved to a very small room where we just had to stay there. Oh yeah, Jewish kids couldn't go to school anymore either. So that was the end of that. Of course, things got worse because I was there during Kristallnacht. And that was the 10th of November. And I remember my parents talking about the 10th of November without ever mentioning it, just by saying, well, that happened before, or they had a memory, oh, that was before. And then they'd say something about, oh, that was after. It was a delineal part of time that we measured everything with. My father went to Dachau because he was rounded up that night. And yes, he had nightmares for many years, probably all the rest of his life. And he would wake up at night screaming, soaked in perspiration. So I know that he told my mother the things that happened there. I overheard them. I was just a little girl. But I remember being afraid of everybody in uniform. And I want to say this about the governments or where Jews are in the world. Whenever someone wants to be a dictator, the first thing they have to do is marginalize the Jews in their country or community, because Jews have a history of questioning authority, all the way back to Abraham, who questioned God. So they tend to want to do things that help other people and not go around murdering other people. It's a very difficult thing for a dictator. So when someone wants total power, as history and most of I've read a lot of history, see that the first thing they have to do is get rid of the Jews. And I want to say that, considering my memory, we're in danger. And we need to be very wary, as it was indicated. And I don't want to predict terrible things, but we're going to look back on these times right now as the good times, because things are not going to get better for a while, not looking at what people are doing. They are not acting in their own self-interest, for one thing, if they want to go back to work. And, well, the Germans and the Austrians didn't act in their own self-interest either when they got rid of all their best doctors and best teachers and just good, plain citizens like my parents, who were very patriotic Austrians. They loved their country. And suddenly they couldn't even go walking in the Vienna woods. So I do remember what that was like. And I want to leave you with that thought. I don't want to be a Cassandra, but we need to be vigilant. And thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much. Rabbi King, Jules.
I appreciate being invited to be part of this again today. And like all of you, I am very concerned about where we are today as a nation, as a country, as a world. And I'm worried that our silence may cost us. But I appreciate being with all of you to remember and to be a voice for the 6 million whose voices were extinguished, for the 5 million, the additional 5 million plus that were murdered because they were different, because they were mentally or physically disabled, because they were from the LGBTQ community, because they were politically opposed, because they were Jehovah's Witnesses, for lots of reasons. But today we have an opportunity to, as Ruth mentioned, be vigilant, to be present, to speak up, to do our part so that this will never happen again. And today I remember with all of you and mourn the loss of so many precious lives, but hopefully plan for myself and all of us to be a voice for them.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you very much. Cantor Joe, go. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this program. I'd like to share with all of you the words of a great scholar, a great humanitarian, and a real tzaddik of our people, the words of Elie Wiesel from his book, The Night. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never. Stephen, I lit a candle, 6 candles, one for representing each of the 1 million souls that perished. And I also lit those candles for 6 members of my family, my 3 aunts, my uncle, and my grandparents who perished during the years of the Holocaust. In their memory, I now intone the words of the El Maleh Rachamim. El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bamaroni, Amitzemenu Chanechono, Tuchut, Kanefei HaShekhinah, Kedoshim, Kedoshim Teharim, Kezohar Harakia, Mazahiri, Nishmat, Kol Achiinu Bnei Yisrael, Shenipechu v'Shoah, Anashim, Nashim v'Tov, Shenechaneku v'Shenishrafu v'Shenehargu, Shemasarot nafsham al kiddush Hashem. Tehi menuchato. Ana Baal HaRachamim, Astirem beseter kenafecha, Le'olamim. Tzaror b'tzaror ha'chayim et nishmotehem. Adonai hu נחלתם וינוחו לשלום על משכבותיהם. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, whose radiance is like the heavens, to the souls of all the men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered, strangled, and burned in the Shoah. May they rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may they find eternal shelter beneath your sheltering wings, and may their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Adonai is their portion. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Joe. Before we go to the recital of Kaddish with Rabbi King, I'd like to have a chance to hear from Iris. Iris, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you very well. We're sorry we don't see your pretty face, but we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry not to be able to be involved on that level, but I am certainly there in spirit and fortunately in voice. So I wanted to just say good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor for me to be able to participate. We have come together today to not only remember and commemorate the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but to also honor the memory of all those who perished in this evil atrocity, and to pay tribute to those who survived, those who gained the strength to begin new lives, and those who managed to find new ways to make the world a better place for us all. But as we remember the indelible images of places and times not so long ago, we must remember the destruction of the moral fiber of supposedly civilized people, people who could torture and kill for pleasure. And as we remember Kristallnacht, the pogroms, labor camps, a yellow Star of David on clothing with the word Jude, death marches, the tattooed numbers on arms, the barbed wire, and the ransacking of homes and businesses, while ash falling from the sky covered the streets. We are now confronted with suffering the ultimate insult, the insults of those called deniers of the Holocaust, the people who choose to believe them and the lies they spread. We were insulted again when we learned a while back about high school students in our own Coachella Valley devising a new game called Catch a Jew. And just this morning, we heard about Minnesota high school students making a video mocking Auschwitz, and that victims being transported in boxcars were dancing their way to camp. We must remember all these things, but most of all, we must remember the enormous challenge we continue to face, the challenge of keeping alive the memories of the innocent souls of all who died, along with honoring them and their horrific struggles, both during and after the concentration camps. We must remember their incredible tenacity, learning to pick up the shattered pieces of their once accomplished and joyous lives, dealing with the aftermath of watching their loved ones murdered and recovering from the infliction of physical and mental abuse. But as the Holocaust survivors pass on, who will remember them? Who will say Kaddish? Who will remind future generations? Who will remember the Anne Franks, or the families with babies hidden in attics or basements for years with barely enough food, unable to utter a sound? And who will remember the righteous Gentiles who risked their own lives to protect them? So as we commemorate this day, we must continue to assume the responsibility to be vigilant. We must continue to remember the tears of these tragedies, and we must pass on to the messages of never again and never forget. Many thanks to everyone here today, because we are the ones who will be the conscience of the world. Thank you again, and thank you everyone for being there today.
Thank you, Irish Smotrich, Mayor of Rancho Mirage. Gina Nestander, Mayor of Palm Desert, are you there?
Hello, yes, thank you for inviting me today. And you bring to life the Holocaust for me. The closest I have had growing up with the Holocaust was reading the book, The Diary of Anne Frank. And I can remember as a 10-year-old child, I was so heartbroken and sad reading that book. And that's what spurred me to start looking at history and finding out what actually happened. As a young girl, I really couldn't believe human beings could do that to other human beings. And I hope and pray to God this never, ever happens again to our society. And thank you for keeping this memory alive.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you. The Mayor of Palm Springs, Jeff Course. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for everyone who spoke. This is always just reflection time, and just thinking about how early I learned of the Holocaust. So many of my grandparents, brothers and sisters, and their parents who were all slaughtered. And I think the one thing that really stood out just from today, in addition to the importance of remembering the Holocaust, is several people said it, and Ruth, you really hit on this, that it's being vigilant from the start when you start seeing these things, the need to prevent ever going down this kind of path again. And as several people spoke about, as we see attempts to scapegoat different groups of people around COVID-19 is already starting, and how important it is that we always stand up and never let that path begin, because it just starts with scapegoating during an economic crisis and can lead to such terrible consequences. So as we take in today and remember 6 million Jews, the 5 million non-Jews who were slaughtered, just recommitting ourselves to standing up whenever we see that kind of injustice and stopping this from ever happening again in any way, shape, or form. So thank you so much for organizing it and for everyone participating.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Talia Hawley is the Education Director at the Tolerance Education Center. Talia, the floor is
hello,
yours.
everyone, and thank you for being here. I would like to also acknowledge the fact that Yom HaShoah is called Yom HaShoah VeHaGvura, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and also Heroism Day. We not only remember the people who suffered, but we also remember the spirit of standing up against the evil that took place. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was a big uprising, and it took the Nazis more than almost a month to end. It took longer than what it took the Nazis to conquer Poland, because there was an uprising, because there were a lot of acts of heroism. All the people that stood up against the Nazis, all the righteous Gentiles that were recognized. There's so many that were not recognized. So I would like to also have the remembrance of those people who were not recognized and who were recognized and who stood up against the Nazis. And remember all the heroism that took place during that very difficult time. And I work at the Tolerance Education Center. It was built by Earl Greif, Randy's father, a Holocaust survivor. And we bring students here to share with them the stories, the atrocities, and to give them tools to fight ignorance, to fight injustice, and to let them know that it always begins very, very small. But when one group is compromised, no one is safe. Thank you.
Thank you also, Talia, for running the school and educating the young people. Thank you, Talia. I'd like to give the floor now to Jeff Brandt, the son of Joe Brandt.
Oh, well, thank you. Didn't quite know I was going to be doing any speaking, but I'd like to say that I heard some very good information, very good advice for our own country and for our own world. One of them being the ultimate insult is the existence of Holocaust deniers. That struck me very deep. Couldn't be more true. And then Michael, of course, touched upon the fact that there are some correlations that need to be made about what's happened in today's world, what's happened in the recent today's world as well. And the main thing in that is the fact that the silence will cost us. And that cost could be greater than anyone can even ever think. Those that know me know that I'm not silent about these things. I'm not silent about our political world either. And I will continue because the silence will cost us.
Thank you, Jeff, and say hello to your mom. I'm sure she's home, and she's a survivor of Auschwitz and also a Hungarian, which is very important.
I will.
As a Hungarian. I'd like to give it to Randy Greif. Randy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and thank you for allowing me to participate today. I also didn't know I was going to be speaking, but having listened to everybody has brought up so many thoughts about what's going on and what's happened in history to me. And I would be echoing a lot of what people have said. But to give you a little background on my family who don't know, my father was born in a very small village in Poland. And like many of you that are here today and many people that will watch this recording, we lost our family members in the Holocaust, relatives that I was never able to see and who I deeply miss. Growing up, I knew that my father was a Holocaust survivor, but I must say he never talked about it much. I think it was just too painful for him to relive the horrific experiences that he did. I actually was brought up thinking that he was from Czechoslovakia, not Poland. He blocked out so much of that part of his life that he wasn't able to even speak about it. And it was only when he heard the same kind of Holocaust deniers that Jeff was just talking about speaking on the television that this never happened, that these people never died, that it was all fake, that he decided he needs to start letting the world know that he lost his family there and 6 million other Jews, along with all of the other people, non-Jews, that were killed during the Holocaust. And that's when he decided he was going to set up the Tolerance Education Center primarily for education for kids. And I do also just want to echo how what we're going through now is this very scary time, because as we were just talking about earlier, things don't happen like a light switch. It doesn't become horrendous in a day. It's a slow experiences where rights are taken away, people become more bigoted. During economic crisis, there's something about human nature that wants to point the finger at other people, that this wasn't our fault, it was somebody else's fault. And I think we run the risk of seeing that now, and that we do have to stand up against that, because we are heading for some difficult times. We're in difficult times now, but they'll remain difficult for a while. And when we have hardship that's going on around the world, this is something I'm afraid we're going to see more of. And we have to be very vigilant to stand up against it, not just for our own people, but when we see it against any peoples. And unfortunately, we are seeing a little bit of that now. Now is the time to make our voices heard.
Randy, thank you very much for your thoughtful words, and I want to especially thank your family, your father, for providing this desert with a Tolerance Education Center, and that we hope that you will continue their legacy for a long time to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in concluding our program today, thank you, all of you, for participating. Rabbi Jules King, please recite the Kaddish and we'll recite it with you.
You're able to please rise with me as we remember all of these precious, precious souls. Yikadal, Yikadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma Divarach Hirute, Ve'amlik Mahute, V'chayid Hon, U'yome Hon, U'chayed Ekol Beit Israel, Agala U'bizman, Karid, Imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, Le'olam Olalmei Alamaya, Yitbarak, Yishtabak, Yipa'ar, Yitraman, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal, Shmei Dekusha Brihu, La'ela Min Kol Birchata, Vashirata, Tushvachata, Vanechamata, Damiran, Belma, Vimeru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu, Ve'kol Israel, Vimeru, Amen. Osei Shalom Bimraman. Huyasei Shalom Aleinu, Ve'kol Israel, Vimeru, Amen. May the source of comfort comfort all of us and all those that we care for around the world. And may their memory never be forgotten. May it always be for a blessing. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, and I hope we'll see each other personally soon.
Thank
As
you.
they say in French, sei gesund.